Joining us right now via Zoom chat is the author of The Dictator Pope, published by Regnery Publishing. It's a book I've gone through a few times, actually. I have the audiobook version of it. I got it a few years back, and I've listened to it several times now. And I think it's the fifth chapter of this book, is a detailing the visitation to the Friars of the Immaculate. And it is a heart-wrenching story to listen to, how this particular order of incredibly booming vocations and great life and multiple houses all had to come to a screeching halt as a result of this. And so to discuss this issue with us is the author himself, Henry Cyr. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for being on our program.
Good morning.
Let's start with the Dictator Pope itself. Tell us the story of how you came to write this particular book. What is it about, and why did you feel the need to publish this?
Well, I had been living in Rome since the beginning of Francis's pontificate, and one heard more and more about what was going on. What really precipitated my writing the book was what happened in the Order of Malta, for which I was working at the time. But in fact, I was thinking of, or to be exact, I was thinking even before that a book of this kind needed to be written. I didn't think I could write it myself because I was working for the Order of Malta. But then in January 2017 came the dismissal of the Grand Master of the Order by the Pope. I decided to resign, and I was left free to write the book. And of course, I had access to a lot of contacts in the Vatican because I was living in Rome at the time.
You know, there have been a number of books that have come out over the last, especially since 2018, the Summer of Shame, that detail the scandals and the corruptions and the hierarchy of the church. But I have to say, I think yours is among the best written. It's very well written. It's very well researched. And it doesn't read like conspiracy theory. And that's part of the reason why I've gone through it a number of times. The story of the Order of Malta by itself is a topic I think we could spend quite a bit of time on. Most lay faithful either were oblivious to what was going on in the Order of Malta, or in fact was completely over their head and they weren't sure, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. Can we take just a moment, and could you sort that story out for us? What were the scenarios in the Order of Malta that were creating scandal?
The situation was that the hospitaller of the Order of Malta was thought to have been responsible for the distribution of condoms on a large scale as part of the Order of Malta's charitable works. Now, the Grand Master wanted to dismiss him for this, and he in fact did so in December 2016. In this he had the support of Cardinal Burke, who was the Vatican's envoy to the Order of Malta. Then the man dismissed, Baron Bergoglio, appealed to the Vatican. And what happened was that a month later, the Pope summoned the Grand Master to the Vatican, ordered him to resign, and reinstated Bergoglio. So you had the strange situation that the man who tried to uphold Catholic teaching on birth control was dismissed, and the man who'd violated it was reinstated. But the main point here was that this was intended as a blow to Cardinal Burke, whom Pope Francis regards as his chief enemy, and he was, to all intents and purposes, dismissed from his position as the Vatican's representative to the Order of Malta. And that was the main object of the exercise, but also to remove the Grand Master, who was Cardinal Burke's main supporter.
And where is the Order of Malta today? Cardinal Burke's been removed. Did they learn any lessons from this? Are they still participating in the distribution of condoms? I mean, the Order of Malta is kind of one of these quiet organizations in the church. They go back so many centuries. They have the Maltesers, the hospital in Bethlehem. I mean, they're pretty extensive organization. So where are they today? And how about the members? How are they feeling about all of this?
Well, the order has been completely under the thumb of Bergoglio ever since he came back in January 2017. It's been under his control internally, so to speak. He hasn't had it all his own way, because he's wanted to introduce various changes in the order to basically to secularize it, to remove the power of the religious members, those who take the religious vows. But in this, he's been opposed by the successive Vatican representatives to the order, and he hasn't been able to make the changes he's wanted. As far as the condoms go, I very much doubt whether they're still distributing condoms. But
praise God.
One doesn't know. It could be being done, in an unauthorized way.
Now, with the Malta organization, especially here in the United States, the associations, are they somewhat independent? I mean, or are they controlled from the central authority?
No, the national associations have their own works, and the central government of the order doesn't control them. No.
Well, so I'm sure a lot of members were probably very scandalized by that fallout, but probably continue in their works.
Oh, yes. It varies from country to country. In some countries, in England especially, the former Grand Master, Fra Matthew Festing, has a great deal of support. I think one could probably say that in most of the order, people don't know what it was all about anyway.
Well, let's turn to the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate. It's curious as to why so soon into the Pope Francis pontificate was the visitation announced, and then the fallout seems to be very incredible. So can you tell us about this story? Who are the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, and why did they receive an apostolic visitation?
Well, the inquiry into the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate began actually before Francis was elected, though it hadn't gathered any sort of pace. It began to gather pace under Francis. The Friars of the Immaculate were founded, I think, about 1970. I forget, as an offshoot of the Franciscans as such, and they had enormous success. They have a special devotion to Our Lady, and they founded dozens of friaries all over the world, working especially in very poor countries, because they really do live the Franciscan vocation of poverty. But the trouble arose when just after the traditional rite was liberalized by Summorum Pontificum, the order decided to adopt the traditional rite, not as the only rite of the order. They became biritual, and this caused opposition among a very few members, about half a dozen members, who started causing the trouble. And the Vatican has been able to use those members as a sort of Trojan horse within the order to virtually destroy the order.
Henry Cyr is our guest. His book is called The Dictator Pope. It's published by Regnery Publishing. The inside story of the Francis papacy is the subtext. And by the way, real quick, you published it under a pseudonym. Tell us who.
Marcantonio Colonna. Yes, I published it first in an Italian version, and I adopted the name of a great soldier of the church in the 16th century, Marcantonio Colonna, who commanded the forces of the church at the Battle of Lepanto.
It's pretty fascinating. At what point did the world discover that it was Henry Cyr and not Marcantonio?
Well, I then had it published. I first had it published in the Kindle edition, and I then had it published by Regnery in the printed edition. And they said from the start that I would have to give my real name. And in fact, they issued my name. I forget when it was, a few weeks before publication.
Oh, that was Regnery that did that. I was under the impression that was Amazon. I was completely wrong. Wow, Regnery. Okay, let's go back.
Oh, no, I don't think Amazon was in a position to do so. No, Regnery published my
Fascinating,
identity.
very fascinating. Let's go back to the Immaculate, Friars of the Immaculate. Thank you. So the traditional form of the Mass is kind of what triggers things with a handful of the friars. It's my understanding that their superior, the father of the friars, was somebody who was an altar server for Padre Pio for a very long time, had a great reputation for being a very pious and holy man. Is that the case based on your research? Is that are those true?
Well, absolutely. He became the victim of a series of completely false accusations by the visitor who was imposed by the Vatican, Father Volpe. And he was even able to launch a libel action against Father Volpe, in which the Italian court upheld his case. And I think I'm right in saying ordered Father Volpe to pay damages.
Wow.
So who is Father Volpe? What we know about him, at least from my perspective, is he was put in charge. He was made the commissioner, and then slowly stomped out the Franciscans. But who was he, and what did he do?
I can't give you any details about him. Actually, he died after about a year of beginning his work.
Oh, wow.
He had a stroke and died. So the remaining work of trying to stamp out the Friars of the Immaculate has been carried out by his successors.
Oh, I see. Well, the interesting thing about this to me is that once this whole Traditione Custodes came out and the Ecclesia Dei Commission was moved under the Society for a Religious Life, and all these things started happening, it popped in my head that these things between Joe and I were discussing this, and we were like, this is what's happened to the Franciscans of the Immaculate. And I started reading into it, and I was like, wow, I was blown away by how this seems like, to me, that the tactic is going to be taken against the Franciscan Immaculate is going to be applied to the Ecclesia Dei communities. That's the Fraternity, the Institute of Christ the King, and other similar communities. And we see the first inklings of this with the community of Carmelite sisters in the U.S. Who have the priest who's saying Mass for them happens to be a monk, a hermit who was a Franciscan of the Immaculate.
The visitation itself, like the procedure, the timeline of the chronology of events, they get the visitation. What does it look like? What actually happens to the community? What's the fallout?
You say the community, but of course it's a worldwide community. There were friaries all over the world. One of the first things that happened was that their seminary in Italy was closed down. It was one of the first things that Father Volpe did. Now, I don't really know what's happened with the Friars of the Immaculate since then. I know that a lot of friaries have been closed down worldwide. There's been persecution of various friars who tried to start similar groups in various parts of the world. Philippines, I think. Some of them have set up successfully in England. So I really can't tell you the general picture, but it seems to have been a gradual attrition of their position by the Vatican.
So Father Volpe comes in, he takes over as superior, he places the founder under house arrest and then starts leveling accusations against him, and
Yes.
then starts shutting down the seminary. And from reading the book, it sounds like many of not only did the seminarians leave, but it also sounds like many of the friars were wanting to leave but were being prevented from leaving.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And then, of course, there was the parallel attack on the nuns of the order, and this was launched without even an internal complaint, as there had been in the case of the male members. So it's been a wholesale attack on the order with no justification to it whatever.
How do they prevent someone from leaving the community? How does that work exactly?
Bishops can be ordered not to accept them as priests. Clearly, one way that friars could leave is to join traditionalist groups which don't acknowledge the authority of the Holy See. I don't know how many of them have done that.
We're talking with Henry Cyr. He is the author of The Dictator Pope. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on Regnery's Publishing as well. Talking about the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate and their visitation that did not go very well. In fact, I was just listening to Father Immaculate Mary Dean's testimony from his account of this particular visitation, and he talked about he alleged how Father Volpe visited, as you just sort of indicated, he visited all these other Italian bishops to say, do not take our friars, do not incarnate our friars who are leaving this order, do not take them. And he also talked about how the seminarians who had left, they were released from the order, went to go with another traditional community who was letting them live in their house while the Filipino bishop was sponsoring them. The Filipino bishop gets told he's retired now, 3 years too early. And then the community that housed them gets their own apostolic visitation, only to be shut down and suppressed. I want to say in 2019, they were also suppressed. Do you see a trend here, Mr. Cyr?
Well, obviously, yes. I didn't know the detail about a new community, about the other community which received a visitation. But I did know that the friars who tried to work in the Philippines were suspended a divinis, and the bishop was told that he was not to authorize them as a separate group.
Is there, okay, let's play the devil's advocate, which no longer exists, but let's play the devil's advocate for a second. Henry Cyr, is it even possible that there are things about these communities that we just don't know, that are problematic and troubling, that the Vatican should be concerned about?
Well, I think the most problematic thing in the Friars of the Immaculate were these half a dozen friars who caused the trouble in the first place. The fact is, the Vatican has issued dark accusations about all sorts of irregularities or horrendous practices in the order, but they've never been substantiated. They've had 5 years, more than 5 years to present their accusations, and they simply haven't emerged.
And so my question then becomes, we keep hearing over and over again from people that, the Holy Father is the Pope of Mercy. I've heard he's a good man. He's just not a good theologian, or he's a saintly pope. He just doesn't know how to govern. Like these little statements are said over and over again, but I'm very tempted to say that's not true. I mean, it doesn't seem that this is the way it is, looking at the actions that is being taken. How would you respond to that?
Well, one of my main purposes in writing my book was that I wanted to look into the past of Bergoglio before he was elected Pope, because he was elected with very little knowledge of this. And my first chapter, I think it's my second actually, gives a short resume of Bergoglio's career as a Jesuit in Argentina and as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And people who knew him in Argentina knew very well that he was not a saint or anything remotely like it. I would advise you to read that chapter if you want to know what sort of man Bergoglio is.
Have you found it curious that Pope Francis has not returned to Argentina since coming to the throne?
Well, that's an illustration of what I say. He knows very well that he wouldn't be very welcome there.
That should be a very telling sign, shouldn't it? Now, okay, you've had several years now since the publication of your book. Is there anything you've learned since then that you would incorporate into the book? Is there anything in the book that you would have changed if you wrote it today?
Well, I did some further research on Bergoglio's past, and I found that it was actually a good deal worse than I thought when I wrote the book.
Oh, joy.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes, oh, yes. There are details about his behavior when he was Jesuit superior in Argentina during the military dictatorship. There are details about his connections with sexually abusing priests. It's a pretty frightful story.
Wow. So are you planning another book?
Well, Regnery is not planning to publish a second edition. If they did, I would include those details in it.
Oh, wow. Well,
That's
very fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting because I remember in your book, you mentioned the fact that let me see if I can find the quote. Father Kovalevich accused Bergoglio of a series of defects ranging from habitual use of vulgar language to devious disobedience, concealed under a mask of humility. And they said, we went on to say that the original file and the official Jesuit archives in Rome have disappeared. How did you get that information if the original files were disappeared? That's very interesting.
From a priest who'd read the original report when it came out.
Oh,
this
wow.
was when Pope John Paul II was wanting to appoint Bergoglio a bishop. And as the regular requirement is, the superior of his order, Father Kalvenbach, was asked to write a report on him. And he wrote the report that you quote. He said that Bergoglio was completely unsuitable to be made a bishop, that he was a divisive figure. This report was circulated to the members of the Congregation for Bishops at the time, but John Paul II insisted on making Bergoglio a bishop. Now, the report was available in various copies, one of which was in the Jesuit Courier in Rome, the headquarters of the Jesuit order in Rome, and it curiously disappeared the moment that Bergoglio was elected Pope.
Let me ask you this. Out of all the things you have researched and discovered along the way, what troubles you the most about all of that?
Of all the things that I've discovered, I should say, my book was not very original. 95% of it was from articles that had appeared already in the previous few years. I added some things that I'd found myself from my contacts in the Vatican, but the vast majority of the book was stuff that was in the public domain before I wrote it.
And was there anything that was more troubling to you than other things?
Well, I was going to say, with one large exception, and that is the past of Bergoglio before he was elected Pope, because I traveled to Argentina and I read a biography that had been written in Argentina by somebody who knew him. That was something that was not very well known in the rest of the world. But most of the general information about what was going on under Francis's papacy, this was stuff that had already been published in other articles.
So going back to the communities, the religious communities that are receiving these visitations, and we're starting to see a trend here, the common denominator seems to be the traditional form of piety, the traditional form of the Holy Mass. With the nuns in particular, the Poor Clares, the Carmelites rather, up in Pennsylvania. For them, they could be facing a very uncertain future. What would you say? Is this a trend? Is this the common denominator? Have I read that correctly? And what could be the future of these particular nuns from your perspective, based on your experience?
Well, I don't know the case of the nuns in America. As I say, I only today read this article about them, and I have no information of my own. But certainly it's a trend, and all the former Ecclesia Dei communities are fearing visitations of the kind that that the Friars of the Immaculate have suffered, for example.
You know, there's been several stories out of the Vatican Curia. The former Cardinal Becciu is another example of that, where there's lots of financial scandal, and you never know who the good guys are versus the bad guys. You never know what to believe. Have you ever looked more into those types of stories?
These would be things that have come out since my book was published. I followed the Becciu case to a certain extent.
How do you read that case?
Well, Becciu is clearly a thug, and he's not what you might call the typical old-fashioned, unworldly ecclesiastic. But whether he was guilty of the particular financial irregularities with which he's been charged, I don't know. He may be too clever to have got involved in those things. It may be that Francis has accused him of being guilty of precisely the things that he's innocent of.
And how do you read the Holy Father going to visit the former Cardinal Becciu for a private mass on a day he should have spent with the public? How do you read that?
Well, that's an extraordinary thing. Maundy Thursday.
Yeah.
What is the Pope doing on Maundy Thursday? Celebrating Mass with a cardinal, and one moreover who's under suspicion of grave irregularities. Extraordinary behavior. And Francis gets away with this kind of thing. It's incredible.
Yeah, nobody holds him accountable.
And, you know, that kind of reminds me of the question that comes up constantly whenever things like Amoris Laetitia and his document on the environment, I'm forgetting the name of it all of a sudden, and these kind of people automatically accuse him of having liberation theology tendencies. But you note in your book that he did not have a good relationship with liberation theologians back in Buenos Aires, and you say that he was more in line with Peronism. Could you speak on that and what that means? And also, you know, at first I was like, oh yeah, the Peronism makes sense. But recently he seems to have to take a really hard stand against traditional communities and not playing both sides anymore. Seems like he's very much crystallized in one side. What say you?
Yes, that's very true. In the last couple of years, he's shown much more openly his anti-traditionalist drive. How that is to be explained, I couldn't really say. In general, obviously, Pope Francis is fulfilling the program that his backers in the 2013 conclave wanted him to follow, i.e., one of a pushing of the church in the modernist direction. He did this quite moderately at the beginning, but now he's showing his hand more and more. And I think he's doing it firstly because he realizes there's no effective opposition to him. You know, who is able to oppose him? People like Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Sarah say what they can, but they can't mount any effective opposition. And I think also he's surrounding himself by a clique of like-minded people who don't tell him how things are really going in the church. So he thinks he can get away with this, and for the moment he is getting away with it.
And what about how he takes criticism? You note that in the book on how he, because it seems like you note how he's I think you said vindictive, and it seems to be very true right now. I mean, we've seen it right now. Could you give examples of vindictiveness, or how why you would say that he is a vindictive pope?
Well, I can't remember the details that I was thinking of quoting. Within a very short time of his becoming pope, he had taken vengeance on a number of his enemies in Argentina.
Mm.
The way that people like Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Sarah have been treated is an obvious example of his vindictive behavior. There was the case of the three members of the congregation for worship, I think, in the Vatican, who'd been accused to Pope Francis of speaking against him. He summoned them to private interviews and said, and told them they were dismissed. So, and you know, this is a way in which no previous pope has ever behaved before.
Damian Thompson from The Spectator, formerly from the Catholic Herald in the UK. I've had him on my program before, and last time he and I were talking, he shared with me a time where he spent a week at the hotel there in the Vatican where the Pope lives, and he observed His Holiness in his sort of natural environment, and he speculated that he kind of acted like a mob boss, and he wanted to have his thumb on the pulse of what was going on. He wanted to hear those rumors with his own ear. He wanted to be not separated where he wouldn't be able to feel the sensitivities of what's going on. But he walked around without an entourage and just sort of, he kept classifying it or characterizing it rather like a mob boss. Would you say that is a characterization you would make?
Yes, I would. I had lunch in that place myself once, but the Pope didn't happen to be there that day, so I didn't have the privilege of observing him. But yes, it's been said that the Pope's whole purpose in moving out of the traditional papal apartments and moving into Santa Marta and having lunch in the big dining room there, what was to keep an eye on everybody who works there, because he knows from his experience in Argentina precisely how to control the people around him.
Could you explain your quote here? Their dour, unsmiling archbishop was turned overnight into the smiling, jolly Pope Francis, the idol of the people with whom he so fully identifies. If you speak to anyone working in the Vatican, they will tell you that the miracle in reverse, that when the publicity cameras are off of him, Pope Francis turns into a different figure, arrogant, dismissive of people, prodigal of bad language, and notorious for furious outbursts of temper, which are known to everyone from the cardinals to the chauffeurs.
Yes, when I went to Buenos Aires and spoke to a number of people, they said they were absolutely astonished at the change that came over him when he was elected Pope. In Argentina, he had the reputation of a pretty grim, humorless person. And then suddenly, when he became Pope, he became a sort of ecclesiastical Pollyanna, trying to win the approval of the media, in which he succeeded in doing.
I would say there's a lot of political savviness in that, having the camera guy with him on the subway train ride, or making sure he's seen or photographed or videotaped, carrying his own luggage, paying his own hotel bills, things like that. I mean, that's a pretty savvy, politically smart, not a great virtue, but still a very savvy guy. Was he always that way?
Oh, yes, he was in that respect. Yes, he was always making these gestures and making sure that the media knew about it. But it's exactly the way that ordinary secular politicians behave.
Exactly.
They play to the gallery, and they want to gain popularity that way. They know that the image that a leader has with most people is going to come from the media, and he plays that very successfully.
And what explains the kind of mentality or the language that Pope Francis uses? Well, he'll say something like, yes, the true presence of the Eucharist is true. Yes, people in grave mortal sin should not take it. Abortion is evil, but we should not refuse Joe Biden or other politicians' communion. How do you explain that? Or things like, whenever we talk about homosexuality, he'll say, yes, it's disordered, but at the same time, who am I to judge, referencing to a priest who is a allegedly in homosexual misconduct?
Well, this is classic Peronism. I think the story is told of Peron. He was asked which way to go when he was being driven by his chauffeur, and he replied to him, "Signal to the left and drive to the right." This is the classic Peronist tradition, and you will remember the story I tell in my book of Peron receiving first a fascist and then a communist deputation, and he told them both that they were absolutely right. This is exactly the line that Francis follows as Pope.
So are you saying then that he's neither progressive nor conservative? He's just an opportunist and a power player?
Oh, absolutely an opportunist. And, neither a progressive nor a conservative. No, because he has no principles. For most of his life, he appeared to be a conservative in church terms. When he was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires, people thought he was conservative. His move to the left has taken place since then. And why it's taken place is one of the great mysteries of Bergoglio. Obviously, he thought that it would advance his career in the church, and clearly it has.
But now he's Pope. He has, there's no higher office that he could possibly have other than, I don't know, there is no higher office, even secularly speaking. He has the highest office, so why does he not reveal what he wants to do? He has the power, he has the authority, and he seems to still be an opportunist, but an opportunist to what end? It boggles my mind. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Well, as I say, to try and keep popularity. Though I do think he's misread the situation. What we see in the church, what we've seen in the church under the present pontificate, is that the younger members are still very, very keen on traditional Catholicism. Francis represents the 1960s generation, and I don't think he's realized the way things have changed in the church. So he's playing to the imagined gallery, to express it that way. He thinks that the people with whom he can gain popularity are the modernists in the church. Well, one illustration of the mistake of that is the way his public audiences in St. Peter's Square have virtually disappeared since he became Pope. The rank and file Catholics don't admire him at all, but of course he retains the support of the media, the modernist Catholic media, and above all the secular media.
Speaking of media, he recently made an off-the-cuff comment to the Slovakian Jesuits about a network, a Catholic network that was doing the work of the devil because they were criticizing him. And he made the point that although he personally, as a sinner, deserved that, the church, however, doesn't deserve it, and it was the work of the devil. And then it came out that he was making this comment in reference to Raymond Arroyo and his World Over Live program and his papal posse and the EWTN network, and we commented on that here on the program as well. It boggles my mind because Raymond's on 1 hour per week on the EWTN network. So the other 99.9% of all the other programming isn't critical of anything the Pope does or says. So the 1 hour a week gives them the work of the devil title. But what about YouTubers and Catholic commentators, even ourselves here? Why wouldn't he see them as greater threats than he would see EWTN, for instance?
This just shows how thin-skinned Francis is. Sorry. Yes, I mean, he's very oversensitive to criticism. As you say, does Raymond Arroyo really attack the Pope personally in the way that Francis has said? I wouldn't have thought so. But obviously, the least hint of criticism is treated by Francis as the work of the devil.
Janice?
Yes, I wanted to ask about, I loved your comment about how the modern Catholic Church, you said, Pope Francis is in his catering his message towards Catholics that are mostly within their 60s or older, and how there's a big movement of young Catholics who are moving towards a traditional Catholic spirituality, I guess you could call it. And I myself can testify to that. I feel like a lot. I'm a millennial myself, and Adrian here, he's a Gen Zer, kind of. We're a young generation, and I feel like a lot of our peers are moving towards a traditional Catholic type of spirituality. And so, would you know, Pope John Paul II talked a lot about the springtime of the new evangelization. Do you think that we are living in that time? You know, with all these young people moving towards a traditional Catholic spirituality?
Yes, I do. There's no doubt that traditional Catholicism, true Catholicism, is going to survive and go on growing in the coming years, whatever Pope Francis or anybody else tries to do about it. The problem is that Francis is in a position to cause a great deal of damage by the episcopal appointments he makes, by his attacks on traditional communities. So he's not going to succeed in the big picture, but he is causing a lot of damage.
What about the German bishops and their synod? You know, they're voting 162 votes to 28 recently in their German synod to bless same-sex marriages. Hasn't the Pope warned them not to rupture from the teaching of the Church? And yet nothing seems to happen. They just continue on. What is the deal with the German bishops getting away with seemingly, theological murder, and traditional Catholics are told that they're being suppressed? Why do you see it come down to that in our church today?
Well, you use the word "the deal," and that's exactly the right word. The situation is that the German church is enormously rich because of the subsidies it gets from the German government, and they are in a position to pay the piper. And this shows the hypocrisy of Francis's talk about the Church of the Poor. He has in fact sold himself to rich organizations like the Catholic Church in Germany, and above all, China. This whole agreement with China, the accusation is that China has in fact agreed to finance the Vatican on a huge scale.
Wow.
And this is the reason. This is the reason why the Vatican has made an agreement with the Chinese government, which is absolutely disastrous for the church.
That's horrible. That is. I was just reading an article just today about how the Chinese Communist government is applying tremendous pressure on even the above ground church to get in lockstep with the communist policies. And there is zero. And the Dalai Lama is never invited to any of these interfaith conversations about the climate or anything else because of fear of insulting China. That is incredibly difficult for the average layperson to, I think, understand and accept.
Well, the accusation I quoted was made some months ago by a Chinese person. I can't remember who it is. Obviously, I can't. I don't know the inner details of Vatican finances, but this accusation was made that a multi-million dollar deal was made with the Chinese government, whereby Pope Francis can shrug off the fact that he's lost financial support from the rest of the Catholic Church because he's being financed by the Chinese government. Wow.
And I guess that goes back to McCarrick and being the one to broker the deal to begin with, the former Cardinal McCarrick. Real quick, we're just about out of time. We have about 9 minutes left in our conversation. But the Ecclesia Dei communities recently, after Traditione Custodes came out, they put out this letter, which when I read, I was like, I really wish they would have had more strong language. I wish they would have been more firm. I wish they would have had tried to to push back a little, but they did not. Instead, they kind of were very cordial. They were very, they said, please, Holy Father, send us a bishop. We love you. We'll quote Amoris Laetitia to you. We will do all these things. And after talking to you, I kind of thinking that they are trying to appeal to the thin skin of the Holy Father and and try to get away from the vindictiveness of the Holy Father. Do you think that was the proper tactic, or what's your analysis of that?
Well, the Ecclesia Dei communities can't react by being aggressive. That would be an enormous mistake. What they wanted to do was to show that they are being very reasonable, very moderate, and that only people in bad faith are going to attack them. Well, let's hope that their strategy works under the present pontificate. You can't be sure.
What would you say to those communities, though, about reasonable expectations?
Well, they know better than I do how they ought to conduct their affairs. They have been upholding traditional Catholicism for the last 50 years. I can't claim to advise them. On the one hand, they need to be firm. They mustn't give way on essentials. But on the other hand, as I say, they can't be seen to be reacting aggressively to the attack that's being made.
Henry Sierra is our guest. His book is called The Dictator Pope. It's published by Regnery Publishing. And I wish I could say it's an easy conversation. It's a difficult conversation to talk about the troubles that plague our church, especially the members of the church in the hierarchy. Let's wrap our conversation by asking you, what do you see as the health of His Holiness? There's been a lot of rumors that have surrounded. He's commented on them, joking about people just trying to set up a conclave while he was recovering from his surgery. How much longer do you think His Holiness will be on the papal throne? Do you think he'll retire? Do you think he'll go until he passes? What are your thoughts on the end of his pontificate?
Well, you remember his remark that his life was saved during the operation by one of the nurses. This indicates that the operation was a more serious affair than the Vatican was saying. And they say that the Pope's health has declined markedly since the operation, which is what you would expect. Obviously, people who claim to prophesy about a person's longevity usually turn out to be wrong. So I'm not going to do so. I don't think that Pope Francis is going to resign. If he does, it will be in circumstances in which he tries to control the next conclave completely and ensure that he has his own nominee elected. I really don't know. That may happen, but my prophecy is no better than anybody else's.
What about the next conclave? I mean, again, it's pure speculation, but do you think it might be possible, given the fact that Pope Francis has nominated or elevated many bishops to become cardinals, many of whom he hand-selected from around the world? Do you think it's possible that the next conclave might bring about a more conservative pope?
Oh, very much so, yes. No pope has ever been able to control who his successor is. And the usual pattern in Catholic history is that a pope is elected in reaction to the previous pontificate. Now, it's true, the majority of cardinals at the moment have been appointed by Francis. I don't think that it's necessarily true that they all follow the Francis line, because a lot of them have been appointed in very obscure places where I don't think people have got any idea of different currents in the church. And also, Francis has taken good care that the cardinals don't meet. He hasn't called a consistory of cardinals in his entire pontificate, in complete contrast to previous popes. And this shows how hypocritical his claims of running a collegial church are. He isn't even allowing the cardinals to meet, with the result that they don't know each other. So what is going to happen in the next conclave is going to be complete chaos. You can guarantee that. Now, I don't know in what frame of mind the cardinals are going to arrive. Whether there'll be a surge of opinion saying that there has to be a new direction, or whether the majority will say we want another pope like Francis. I just don't know. But what I can prophesy is that there's going to be chaos in the next conclave.
Wow, we've been talking with Henry Cyr, the author of The Dictator Pope, published by Regnery. You can also get it on Amazon, by the way. I got the audiobook through iBooks on my phone, and I've listened to it a bunch of times. It's very, very good. And we're very grateful for your time, sir. Thank you for being on our program and giving us some insight.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Praise be to God.